Straw Hat Sam here. Welcome to the Blackmagic Pocket 4K naked cage assembly tutorial. This is a long one, but I'm going to go through all the steps required to assemble this cage and all of its accessories, all the flex extensions, everything, including how to make this professional looking extension cable, how to put together this naked monitor that's lightweight and fits in your backpack easily. Yeah, all of it. And this is a difficult project. I would dedicate a full day to this and just walk through my tutorial step by step. Take your time, make sure to take breaks often because this is a tricky procedure and it's simple, but there are many steps and it's easy to get tired and fatigued. So make sure you're taking breaks often and paying close attention to my directions and following them. Now, if you do destroy your camera during this process, even while following my steps to the T, I'm not responsible for that. It's your risk you're taking, it's your responsibility when undertaking this procedure. But I highly recommend doing it because it's going to change your life when it comes to cinematic FPV. The first thing we're going to do is prepare the PCB for all the little components that are going to be attached to it in the final product. The first thing I want to work on is this power port. This takes the 12-volt input from the regulator on board of your drone and it splits it out through this cable to power your Blackmagic camera, and it also powers this fan which is used to cool the CPU. So let's go ahead and solder this up. The first component that you want to install to the power port is the Pico EasyMate slim fitting thing. Now the middle two circuits we aren't using, so what you can do is just snip those right at the base. And the reason why I don't actually pull them out of their sockets is because the little clips that are left over, they help strengthen the connection. Okay, so now we just have the positive and the negative leads. The length that this comes with in the kit is about 50 millimeters long, and that's exactly what you want, so there's no need to trim. Next, use wire strippers to remove the insulation on all four of these wires. And then put a little bit of liquid flux on each of the wires. However you like to do soldering, just do what you do. Whatever you're used to and can make a good joint. And let's tin each and every single one of these. Don't keep the soldering iron long on the wire or else you'll melt this PVC insulation. Okay, next preparing the power port. Next is very important, the two wires, when the clip is facing this direction so that you can see more of the gold bits, not this direction, but this direction. This side right here on the right, this side, this is negative, and this is positive on the left. So positive, negative, positive, negative. So take the corresponding wires and solder them to the correct labeled vias on the circuit board. Okay, there's an ass load of flux left over, so let's scrape all that trash off and clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol. Next, let's prepare the fan. First thing you want to do is unhook the wire from the little plastic tab because the way it sits in the camera, you're going to want the wire to be below the frame. And then from here, measure out 50 millimeters worth of wire and measure it from the very corner of the square, so right about here, and slice that mamma jamma right off. And let's split these two wires apart and strip them. Okay, let's tin those bad boys. Or not tin, but flux them. Let's flux them up. Back to the power port, let's prepare these two pads here. Okay, and then add a little extra flux. And let's try to sink these right in, nice and clean. Okay, and the reason why I am installing all these wires on the top is because we want the bottom to be a nice flat, smooth surface for the double-sided mounting tape. Just gonna give this a nice little scrub with a toothbrush with isopropyl alcohol. Okay, now to install the JST PH 2.0 connector. Place it on top through the holes, then flip it over and clamp that in place. But keep a hold on the connector because it's going to want to fall out. And then get some flux on there. Okay, and I'm going to reposition the clamp so I have more space with the soldering iron. So I'm kind of holding it in place with my fingers here so that it's flush against the circuit board. And I'm just going to hit it real quick with the soldering iron, being careful not to bridge the two sides. And that's all it takes. You can see on the other side the solder actually flowed to create a nice fillet. And then you can go ahead and trim off the excess with some side cutters. Ooh. The reason why I have two extra pads here is if in case you have any peripheries like LEDs or I don't know, a video transmission module that takes 12 volts, you have two extra pads to solder to conveniently place there. Now that we got the power port soldered up, the first thing I want to place on the PCB is the Bluetooth module. So first, if you look at it, how it's going to situate itself, we're going to place it right there. Okay? And we have 2 points of contact here and then a third along here. The 2 little inductors, we're going to use those with double-sided mounting tape. So just take a little square of that and stick it on that little guy. And let's do another. And maybe you should take more care to make the squares as large as possible for the best sticking strength, but okay, so the little stickies are prepared. Now I'm going to use a hot glue gun and run a bead of hot glue right along there and quickly place the Bluetooth module. Okay, just keep your fingers on that. Hold it for like 30 seconds. Okay, and if you want, you can add a little extra hot glue on the top for some reinforcement. So this is what it should look like, and let's hold off on connecting this FPC cable until after we mount the PCB to the cage, because this cable will get in the way of this screw. Next, let's do the power port, and the way this is situated is on the same side as the Bluetooth module, and then the fan goes here. The non-labeled side of the fan, you want that to be facing away from the PCB as shown. Get a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol and just lightly wipe down the areas that we're going to be using and give the power port an especially good cleaning since it probably has a bunch of flux residue. And next we can cut a 45, 45, 90 degree triangle from the double-sided mounting tape. And then just place this triangle on the power port like this. Try to match the two straight edges as close as possible. And then you can trim off the excess with some scissors. Alright, let's peel this thing off and stick it right about here. And gently press down on the corners of the PCB, the power port, and hold that for 30 seconds. And you want this bond to be quite strong because it's the location where you're going to be plugging in the camera over and over again from your drone. Now that the power port and the Bluetooth module are complete, we're done with this side. Let's go on to the top now. Sam from the future here. Before attaching the top buttons assembly here, be sure to remember to plug in the power cable to this little plug right here, because the camera's not going to turn on unless that's plugged in. So make sure to press that in there real good. And it just clicks in. And just as a reminder, these two wires on the right side, these are ground. These two wires on the left side, this is 12 volts in. So pay special note to that. Make sure all of your wiring is going to be correct. Next up is the top buttons assembly. Let's give each of these surfaces a good cleaning because we're going to once again use double-sided mounting tape to stick this to the PCB. So this is where the speaker for the camera used to be when you play back footage, but we don't need that anymore. So now it's a suitable location for mounting this guy. Okay, cut a small rectangle that's going to be about the same size as the stiffener portion of the top buttons assembly. And I'm just eyeballing it. Nice and perfect. Okay, and just press that on. Okay, this next part can be a little finicky. What you want to do is make sure both of these levers for these FPC connectors are raised up so that they will accept the little tabs. And what you want to do is actually insert these in there beforehand so that you know it's going to fit before sticking the main portion down onto the PCB. So you're going to make sure that's aligned and just slowly give it slack as you're lowering the main portion of it, but at the same time you're making sure those are plugged in. It looks like everything's aligned, so I can start pressing down on it. Okay, and while that's cooking, let's throw down these levers to clamp the gold fingers of the top buttons assembly. Okay, that's looking great. This is the on-off switch for the camera now. This is off, this is on. Off, on. And this tiny button is the record button, start, stop, record. And we got full functionality with the tally light here. And then this little black square is the on indicator for the camera. As a bonus feature, what I threw into the kit as a last minute upgrade is this mechanical recording switch. So what you want to do is solder two 26 gauge wires to each side, put a little heat shrink on them, and then I clipped them a little bit short so that you can get more of a tighter bend radius out of it. So next we're going to solder these two leads to these two pads. It doesn't matter the order because all this does is short these two pads, which triggers the record function of the camera. So first let me put some flux on these little pads here, And I'm preheating my soldering iron to 300 degrees Celsius. Normally I do 350 for most things, but I'm doing 300 because this is a very thin, small assembly. It doesn't require a lot of heat. Usually the ground pad requires more temperature than the signal pad with any circuit because there's a lot of metal or a lot of copper. Next I'm going to just apply a little bit more flux to both to make sure everything goes smoothly. And it doesn't matter which one, so just do what's easy. Okay, got that one. And that one. Okay, so I'm going to clean that off with some isopropyl alcohol and then go on to the next step. Okay, for the next component we're going to attach the LCD extension to the PCB, and let's prepare both of these surfaces by wiping down this large stiffener on the extension assembly, and let's also wipe down this area on the PCB. Next, once again, I'm going to cut a piece of double-sided mounting tape roughly the same size as the stiffener on the LCD extension. Okay, I'm going to stick that on there now. I'm going to line it with the front edge. Okay. Next we're going to install this thing by first aligning it with the, see on the bottom here, this is a Molex 64 pin connector. We're going to align that with the male plug on the PCB first, and let's snap that in place. Okay, once that's down, then you can press down on the connector in order to make sure it's fully adhered. Okay, now this guy is stuck right down there. The last periphery that we need to install to the main camera PCB is the sensor ribbon cable. And you take the short end and plug it in on straight here and make sure it's well aligned, and then press down. Should be an audible click. Make sure that's on all the way. And we're going to actually take this and bend it softly. Try to get a good gradual bending radius as you are slowly pinching this, because this end is going to come up and attach to the sensor plate of the lens. Okay, so we got a subtle bend on there. It doesn't have to be bent all the way, just enough to get it started. Now that we got the peripheries attached to the PCB of the camera, let's move on to preparing the cage for accepting this guy. So we're going to be mounting the PCB to the bottom plate here, and to save us a little bit of trouble, let's install these standoffs first. I'm going to use some blue Loctite in order to secure the standoffs to the bottom cage, because the bottom cage won't be what you'd be removing. Instead, it's the more permanent side. And install the standoffs such that the cutouts for the alpha gels are facing upward. And I'm just going to tighten these standoffs, not quite all the way, just finger tight. Okay, so all the standoffs are on now. The next thing to do is tighten these all the way. I use wire strippers. There's these rounded edges to them, and they fit perfectly around the standoffs. And then I can tighten from the bottom using the driver while holding the standoff firmly in place. And this way I found makes the least amount of marks on the standoff, but it also gets them very tight so that they'll never come off unless you want them to. Okay, solid as a rock. The next thing we'll be doing is preparing the soft mounts for the PCB. These screws go through these gold-plated holes, and they have silicone on either side to give the PCB some cushioning. First, let's prepare the silicone tubing. Now, you want to slice them to be about 9 millimeters in length, and you want 6 of them. Next, we want 6 of these short segments of tubing at 5 millimeters. Okay, voila. Next, install the 5 millimeter shorter pieces onto each of the 2 millimeter or M2 by 20 millimeter screws. Okay, now we got our 6 soft mount screws. The next thing is to install these onto the main PCB of the camera. To do that, place one of these screws through the top of one of the gold-plated holes, and then secure the screw using a 9 millimeter section of silicone tubing. And just be real careful for this. Don't be tempted to use pliers or anything like that. Just use your fingers. Only soft stuff should be touching the PCB. Okay, now we have all 6 soft mounts installed. Something I forgot to do on the bottom cage is install the fan grommet. Now, orientation matters. The longer side of the fan grommet goes on the bottom. So you insert it from the top, and there really is no bulletproof strategy to doing this. You just kind of gotta force your way in there, and it'll go in. Okay, for this next part, you're going to want to place the CPU fan in the correct orientation before you situate the PCB onto these little mounting points for the soft mounts. So turn the fan so it's oriented like this, and then press it down into the fan grommet, and it's just a friction fit. It just sits nice and flush. There's even a little tiny lip on the inside of the 3D print so that you know you're against the bottom. Okay, once you have that, then you can join the two, and you kind of just got to wiggle it around until you get all 6 of them through. Next, there are these 6 M2 nylock nuts. Go around and just thread those on to the little stubby stubs that are poking out through the carbon fiber. Take a 1.5 millimeter hex driver, insert it into the screw side on the top, then use a 4-box hex driver and tighten that nylock nut down to the point where the screw is just barely poking out from the other side. Just like that. And repeat this for the remaining 5. Okay, that is now a SAF-mounted PCB, and what you want is you want a little bit of clearance underneath the stainless steel, I don't know what it's called, like a shroud over the top of the PCB. You don't want that to touch the carbon. You want there to be a little bit of gap, and yeah, you don't want anything touching the carbon. So if something is touching or misaligned, adjust the screws as needed. Now that we got the PCB finally installed to the bottom cage, we can take the Bluetooth ribbon cable and kind of untangle this mess here and lift up that latch on the connector if it isn't already, and guide this little cable in there. It may take some finagling because that screw is a little bit in the way. Nothing we can do about it, unfortunately. Okay, there we go. I think it's in there. And then close that latch down. So it's always gonna just sit a little funky like that, but it's okay. Okay, we're done with this part. Let's set this aside and get to work on the top cage. Now we're going to fix up the top cage, and let's mount all of these cage brackets to it. First, push the screw through the TPU, then apply your Loctite afterwards. Make sure to drop it like that. And there we go. And a little dabby dab. And then put that on there. Put it on there so that the straight side, the flat side, is facing inward. And tighten that down until it's nice and sturdy and snug. But don't over tighten it because you're screwing against TPU, so it's not going to be like carbon fiber. All right, let's repeat the same process for the 3 other cage mounts. For these smaller brackets, we want to have them facing inward as well. Go and find the 2 8mm length M3 screws that are in your kit and use these for the slot struts. There we go. And make sure they're oriented so that the curve is facing downward. So it's concave down for all those mathematicians. And this one you don't want to tighten up too much because it's got to be able to move. But on the other hand, you don't want it so loose that it's loose and sloppy. Like you don't want any play. It's got to be silky and firm. Okay, almost done with the top plate. The next thing we have to do is install the battery straps. It's good to do this now so that you don't risk damaging the PCB doing it after it's been installed. But if you forget to do this, you can easily take the top cage off and fold it off to the side and then install them. It's just a little bit safer this way and easier. And take note, there are chamfers on these slots built in. They may be small sometimes depending on the tolerance of the machining, but they are there so they're not going to cut into the battery straps. Okay, next up is the lens mount. It'll be easier to first install these standoffs onto the front plate before we actually install the 3D print with all the bits of lens inside. So for the front plate side, we want to have the standoffs be semi-permanently secured. So that means getting out the Loctite. And the orientation matters. Screw it on such that the standoffs are facing like so. Okay, now that we have all 4 of our 20mm standoffs installed in this direction, let's go ahead and tighten them down using the same method I showed you before. Okay, this is ready to go and ready for the lens mount for when we do that. Hopefully at this point now you've kept all of these parts safe and you haven't gotten any fingerprints on your IR filter yet. What you want to do now is install this little guy. You want to position it so that the smaller diameter side goes inward from the top. So just kind of plop that in there and then use your microfiber towel, whatever you call it, and work your way in. So it's kind of at an angle, so it got jammed. So you can God damn it. Okay, trying that again. Plop that in there and position it with the microfiber cloth and press down on the rim. Don't press down on the center glass because you could risk breaking it. And just work your way around. It's a little bit of a tighter fit inside of my lens mount than it is for the original camera, but it will go in. Don't you worry. And the rim is made out of metal, so it's pretty strong. I want to loosely install the metal ring, which goes on the top of the lens mount. And let's see here, get that positioned so that it's lined up with the holes underneath. And then we're going to be using the 00 Phillips head driver to get these screws in there. These small screws are the original ones that came with the camera, so make sure you and don't tighten it down all the way. If you see it kind of jump up on the other side like that, back it off, and then let's tackle it from the other side now. Okay, I bottomed out. Let's back it up a few turns. Okay, so this should still be loose. And the reason why is because we want clearance. We want clearance for this little guy. So this slot in the bottom is meant to carry the ribbon cable through. So position that ribbon cable through that slot without touching the IR filter, and then push it in, kind of press down, and align the two straight edges with each other. Now this part right here tends to get hung up a little bit, so you kind of got to press that inward and maybe even use a screwdriver, like a hex driver, to push that down as you push this down, and just apply even force all around. Make sure it's well seated. Okay, now let's take the remaining screws and just loosely install them for the bottom half. Now this last screw can be a bit difficult. At least it's well aligned though. You can see that the hole is directly concentric with the cutout in the PCB. So first position your screw on your driver, and it has a tendency to flop around and fall out. So hold the lens so that the IR filter is above, so that if it does fall, it's not going to hit the IR filter and scratch it. And let's try to get that in there. Twisting. Shit. Come on. Okay, just when you barely get it in there, take a break and then repurchase, find a better grip on it so it's nice and stable, and finish it off. And this one you can tighten all the way, just don't over tighten because it's a very thin circuit board. And confirm that this little switch is actually able to move. You want that to be able to spring back up after the lens has been installed. Let's finish tightening up these 4 screws. Just slowly work your way around, sort of like changing the tire on a car. And do a visual inspection to make everything is seated and flush. You don't want anything to be misaligned or just jammed in there. Everything should fit quite perfectly. Now, as a demonstration, I want to show you what you do if you accidentally touch the sensor and get your grubby fingerprints on it. Or sorry, not the sensor, but the IR filter. So I touched it with my finger and I'm going to try to clean it. What you do is get some lens cleaning solution or deionized water or like distilled water and spray down the tip of a Q-tip. You're going to want a whole bunch of these because depending on how greasy you got the lens, it's going to take successive wipings with the Q-tip. Now take the Q-tip after it's been saturated with the fluid and wipe most of it off on a microfiber towel. Then do very small circles on the lens, and these little blobs of moisture, for the first time around, they're going to remain because you have the most amount of solution. But as you go along, twist the Q-tip gently so that you're unveiling a clean surface. Okay, and we're just scrubbing away, but not applying very much pressure at all to the glass. Now let's get the other side, the clean side, spray it once again, maybe with not quite as much, and then wipe or dry it on the microfiber cloth, and then go at it again. This time we're going to be absorbing some of that moisture that we put down with the other side of the Q-tip. And notice how the little blobs of moisture are going away, because right now we're applying moisture, as you can see, but it's evaporating pretty quickly. That's what we want. And once you make sure you've covered all the area, find a dry spot on the Q-tip and do one last lap around the circumference, and make sure to go through the center as well. Okay, that's looking pretty okay. And if you notice like a slight cloudiness to it, that just means you got to do more trips with the Q-tip. Get another clean one and follow the same process, and until the very end where you're doing it with a dry Q-tip. And all you're doing is pretty much wiping up any residual solution or dissolved salts or greases on the lens. So that's looking pretty clean. Next, let's prepare the sensor plate for installation. To do that, we have to remove the original sensor ribbon cable using the number 0 Phillips driver. Treat this part with as much care as you did the main PCB, because if you screw anything up here, your camera's not going to work too. Now you can have an opportunity to see the sensor. So the original sensor ribbon cable has this little tab. You can just use your fingernail to gently pry it up. Okay, so that's done. Double check the sensor that there's nothing on there, no grease, no dust or anything like that. It's looking pretty clean to me. In fact, I'm not even going to use my squeeze bulb. Make sure you got a nice clean dust-free surface to place your sensor plate downward. And next, install some of the shims. Now this, you're going to go back later and really dial this in. But for now, just throw all of the stiff shims on here, just the non-annoying ones, because there's some really thin ones that are really unwieldy. You're probably going to end up using them later, but just for now, just to get the whole assembly together, just throw the stiff shims in there. And then you can take your sensor plate and make sure your back end is nice and dry. I just realized how that sounded. Okay, and there's this rubber curtain or curtain or gasket that surrounds the sensor plate, and that kind of hugs this groove, this rectangular groove around the lens mount. So just place that down, In addition, the locating pins for the shims will go through the PCB of the sensor plate. Okay, so that's pretty well seated in there. We're going to be using these 3 long screws that came with the camera, and you can just put them in there and get them started by hand. And these are number 0 Phillips drivers, or Phillips screws, and my driver is way too magnetic. Come on. There we go. And don't really worry about tightening them down all the way, because we're only going to be opening it up again when we do our shim calibration. Also, don't worry about installing this ribbon cable yet, because we're going to have to undo it anyway. Alright, it's time to install the rest of the stuff. Do that. Place the whole lens assembly inside the front plate. And it can rotate, which is fine. And place the spring into that little hole. Okay, it's a little misaligned, so get some tweezers and make sure that's standing straight up. Then install the button, and the button should restrict the rotation a little bit. Next, put in the plastic space filler, as I call it. And make sure that's seated all the way. Okay. And then we can install the ring spring. Bruce ring spring. Bruce Springsteen. Okay. And you can locate it, the little holes of the ring spring on the locating pins that are printed into the 3D printed mount. Then once you have that, you can make sure that's real centered. Then place the stainless steel ring around it, the ring around the rosy. And now you want to kind of caress it with your whole hand to make sure everything is in place. Also check that the button is still able to move. And then hopefully your hopefully your stainless steel screws are nearby and your 1.5 millimeter hex driver. Get these started with your fingers or something. Don't try to attempt it right away with the hex driver, because you may stab your lens mount right in the face. Okay, you can go on to the next one. Don't try to do them all. Don't try to tighten it down all the way. Get it started with your fingers, then finish the job with the tool. And then loosen it up a little bit, because we want the ring to still be able to slide around, because we're going to do a final positioning at the end. Okay, so it's mostly on there, but see how it wiggles around? That's what you want, so that you can position it so that there's ample clearance between the button and the carbon fiber. So try to get that as centered as much as possible. Okay, and then tighten it down the rest of the way. And let's make sure that's dusted off, and then you can install your lens cap to make sure it's clean on the inside. Just double check to make sure the button is still nice and smooth. We need to install the lens brackets. These lens brackets have 2 sides. The side that's smooth and has the chamfer, that's the side that we want to insert the M3 heat inserts. Warm up the soldering iron to 350 degrees Celsius, and then put the insert on the tip, and then real quickly press that in there, but be very gentle. Only use the soldering iron to let it go in. And then push it slightly below the surface so that when it backs out, it's nice and flush. For the back side, there's going to be a little bit of flash left over, so you can take that and pull it right out, and it makes a nice clean look to it. So let's repeat that for the other 3 brackets. Okay, these little guys are done. So go around and just push these lens brackets that we made earlier such that the, I don't know, the flower edge is facing outward. Okay, and you want to arrange them so that they're in this orientation. Now when putting on the top plate, there are several things that you want to make sure are done. One is that the battery straps are installed onto the top plate. This makes it a lot easier. 2 is your sensor ribbon cable is ready to go, and it's going to go up and through one of these holes on the top plate. And your mechanical button, if you choose to install, make sure that's soldered up and ready to go, and keep the nuts and the spring washer off to the side. And what else? I found that mounting the whole lens assembly to the top cage first before connecting is usually easier. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already done so. I'm sorry, this video is a little bit out of order because of some things that I learned along the way. And then lastly, make sure your card door is installed before you put on the top cage, or else you won't be able to put it on after the fact. Now we can finally attach our lens mount to the rest of the camera. To do that, let's position these lower lens brackets in between the front cage brackets. Next, let's go in there with the 10mm button head screw and apply some Loctite and smooth that out so it's not super globby, such that you don't get as much on the TPU. And you could have attached the hinge before installing the sensor ribbon cable. That method would have worked as well. Okay, let's tighten these up to our liking. And similar to the slot struts, you want it to be smooth and silky, but no slop. Okay, so first let's do the sensor ribbon cable. So let's poke that through, and I'm just twisting it at a diagonal in order to fit it through that rectangular slot. And then now that's through, just turn it around. And then next we're going to do the record switch. So just lift up the top cage slightly, put that through, and then put on the washer. I recommend using this washer because this nut can come loose and it's a bit of a pain to have to tighten it all the time. So just loosely fit that on. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. We can tighten it more later on when we screw everything down. And just make sure the wires are not obstructing anything or getting pinched. So it looks like we are okay there. Okay, and coming over to the sensor ribbon cable, make sure that the sensor ribbon is not getting pinched between the upper end of the standoff and the top cage. So it looks like we're good there. Just to pin everything down, I'm going to put a couple screws into the top plate, or the top cage, just to get everything located properly. Okay, so that's nice and secure. And to install the sensor ribbon cable, you just got to line it up with the socket on the sensor assembly. Also, be sure to clean both of these connectors with a toothbrush and isopropyl alcohol, and then dry it out with one of these squeeze bulbs, just to make sure there's no dust or particulates that are going to interfere with the signal connection. Okay, so get that nicely lined up, and then maybe even brace one of your fingernails against the sensor plate, the PCB, so you don't put undue stress on it as you're pushing down. And sometimes it clicks, sometimes it doesn't. This one I have unplugged and replugged several times, so it doesn't click this time. But it doesn't matter. It's still a secure fit. Okay, so that looks good to go. To tighten down the manual record button all the way, get some needle nose pliers or something to grip the plastic portion of the switch. And then, unfortunately, regular prop tool is too small for this nut, so a crescent wrench, a mini crescent wrench or something like that will work just fine. Let's swing these slot struts over, and one of them will tighten as you swing it over, so you might have to loosen it a little bit to get the right amount of friction. And then the other one will become a little bit loose as you swing it over, so you could tighten that one a little bit. Okay, and then get your black thumb screws that are included and screw those in. Okay, let's finish up with the rest of these 6mm button head screws. Okay, and just go around and lightly tighten each one, just so it's snug. Doesn't have to be super tight because there's a chance that you'll need to take the top cage off to do maintenance or do something. So just tighten it down so it's snug. Sam from the future here. Go ahead and remove this back plate until we finish the sensor shim calibration process. But the reason why is because this plate is made out of carbon fiber, and when you're leaving the lens communication ribbon loose like that, it can actually make contact with the carbon fiber, as you can see, just like that, which could potentially cause a short. So just take this and remove it and set it aside until everything is ready to go and this is installed into its appropriate connector. Okay, we are still nowhere near finished. Remember this guy, the LCD? Yeah, we gotta fix that up. So, start with the 3D print. Align it so that the screen should be facing you like this, and then the buttons should be like that. So make sure the windows are aligned, and then use the little hardware bag for the screen is right here. And let's see, I believe these plastic screws, no, they use a 1.5mm hex. So use these self-tapping plastic screws in order to attach the front part of the LCD buttons. Okay, and be careful with these screws. Make sure you don't tighten them too much because you can strip the plastic. Next, let's install these 10mm standoffs. And for these, I don't really bother with using Loctite because it's not going to be vibrating like crazy like a drone would be. But I do tighten down the standoffs using my usual method for the front plate side. We need to use some double-sided mounting tape, cut little strips, and lay them out all around the perimeter. Make sure all of these are stuck down pretty securely, and we can go at it with the tweezers to peel off the backing. Now that's done, let's install the LCD. Okay, so this is the direction that the LCD goes, and we can use these standoffs as kind of guides, and really the hard part is going to be just making sure the vertical alignment is even between the two sides. So let's give it a shot. Okay, we can see there's now contact between the LCD and the carbon fiber. And I'm just gently going around making sure that it's well stuck. All right, it's button time. Plop these little rubber things in, make sure the alignment is correct. Like that, so that on the front, it looks like this. And then place the button things on. And there's locating pins which help you make sure it gets aligned. Okay, flip that over, make sure that the buttons spring back fully, and you can press them and they're not getting hung up or anything. Okay, next is a pretty satisfying part. We're going to install the monitor extension now. So for the monitor extension, be sure to clean it off with some isopropyl alcohol, specifically these portions, these components right here. They accept the ribbon cable portions, and sometimes during the manufacturing process, some flux residue can cause the latches to become stiff. So we want to make sure everything is loosened up, and if there's any debris or solder balls or flux residue stuck on the contacts, we want to make sure that we remove that. So don't be shy with the amount of isopropyl alcohol you use. Make sure to really drench it, because we want to work loose anything that's caught in there. So we have a good electrical contact, because we only want to do this once. Okay, let that dry for a while, and maybe use a heat gun to evaporate all of the isopropyl alcohol. All right, this is a pretty fun part. Yeah, lift that flap, put it over the top, and then first insert this J plug thing. Okay, something to note with this particular connector. I think it's something to do with the connector that I'm sourcing for this particular component, but for some reason, for my connectors, there's slightly more resistance in order to insert this flexible PCB. So if you see any little gap, you see that little gap between the top of the connector and that little, I don't know what to call this thing, this little ledge. If this is not all the way down, you're going to get a black screen. So just get in there with some tweezers and push down all the way. You want to make it so it's absolutely flush. And just apply a little bit of pressure, make sure it's in there all the way so that it's nice and flush. These little tabs should be down all the way. So it might take a little extra force, and that's why I had you clean the connectors with a toothbrush. This toothbrush looks gigantic, with some isopropyl alcohol in order to make it so it goes in easier. So once you're confident that these tabs are all the way situated nice and square up against the connector, then you can throw that latch down and you have a nice good solid connection. Okay, and let's repeat that for the other plugs. And for this one, I always use these tweezers. Now that all the connectors are secured, this next bit is subtle but important. We're going to tape the monitor extension to the back of the LCD. I have Kapton tape, but you can use electrical tape just as well. I use Kapton because it's used exactly for this purpose, and also it tends to stick a bit longer. So here's the trick. You want to make sure that the connector is sitting above that ledge, okay? You don't want it up here, or else when you assemble the LCD case, it's gonna squish the back of the LCD. So you want to place the connector slightly above it. Something that I recommend doing just for electrical purposes is see this shielding, or the outer stainless steel housing for the connector, is connected to electrical ground, and we don't want it to connect or touch the back of the LCD, which is stainless steel. And so for that reason, I recommend putting a piece of electrical tape on the LCD. And let's see if I can gently work that on there without making a complete mess. Okay, that was okay. And then you can get some tweezers or something to press that on there. Just gonna work it on, and this adds a little bit of an insulating barrier. It will still work if this connector touches the back of the screen. I've never had any issues, but other users have reported issues with that. So for that reason, I recommend applying a little piece of electrical tape right here, and that should solve any issues. Okay, so with that in mind, position the top connector here on that ledge. You can feel it with your finger, and make sure the monitor extension assembly is aligned, and then you can apply your tape to stick that down, and really make sure this tape is on there. You don't want it peeling off because it does add structural support for this whole thing. Okay, another piece of tape for the other side. And for this one, you want to have it favoring the bottom side, or in this case, the right side, because this connector is going to be lifted up a little bit in order to make contact with the other side of the case. So really work that adhesive, make sure it's on there super good. Let's wipe off the back of the stiffener of the LCD to provide a nice clean surface for some double-sided mounting tape. And then you can also clean the side of the carbon that is going to be coming into contact with the mounting tape. For adhering the stiffener to the back of the carbon fiber here, we're going to be using some double-sided tape. If you have some of this Scotch VHB tape, it's called a very high bond. They come in various numbers, but anyway, the difference between this stuff and your typical wall mounting tape is the thickness. So notice how the VHB on the right is thinner than the extreme mounting tape on the left. If you have this stuff, I would use this for mounting the back of the monitor extension. The reason why is because it adds a little bit more clearance between the connector and the back of the LCD. Bob, go get some mountain tape. That'd be a great brand name, mountain tape. Okay, then cut a rectangle of mounting tape that is roughly the same size as the stiffener. So now apply your double-sided mounting tape, to the stiffener, and align it with the left edge as you see on camera. You can use your fingernail to apply concentrated pressure to make sure the adhesive is sticking to all parts. When you think that's secure, then you can get some fine tip tweezers to peel off that backing. There we go, got it. And next we can replace the back cover, so it should not be touching the adhesive or the double-sided mounting tape when you put it flush like that on top of it, and that's when you know that your connector is situated correctly and it's not going to crush the LCD. Okay, let's throw those screws on there. So the double-sided mounting tape is not touching the back of the LCD, and we need to help it out. Using this 2.5 millimeter hex driver, this Allen key, we can hook it from behind, get behind there and underneath, and then use that to apply some pressure upward. And the trick here is you might encounter some resistance, especially on the left side from wanting to push upward. And the reason why is because as you're pushing this stiffener upward, you're shortening the length of the rest of it. And by shortening the length, it's causing the back of the connector to press up against the metal backing of the LCD. So you might just have to help it out a little bit. Just push up on the left side of the connector and then go back in there and make sure it makes contact all the way on both sides. You can hold it there for like 30 seconds to make sure that the double-sided tape is fully bonded to both sides. Here's a pro tip. If you ever find yourself needing to disassemble your LCD for whatever reason and you've already stuck on the adhesive, the double-sided tape, I get a 9-inch propeller and I just like work my way across it like this. Just be very gentle. Don't put any stress on the monitor extension. Don't try to peel it all off in one go. Do it slowly like this until you get deeper and deeper, and you're just scraping away the double-sided tape until it finally comes loose. You gotta be real patient with it. And then once you think you've got most of it off, then you can start prying it downward. And you can see there's still a little bit more back in there, pretty deep. So I'm just gonna do a sawtooth action. And I think I got it. Just holding the connector down. There we go. And then removing the gunk without putting too much stress on the cable, you can put some pressure on the back of it, but not so much pressure that you crack the screen. And then you can just like roll it off, sort of like a booger. Just imagine you're picking your nose and you want to get as large of a booger as possible without leaving anything behind, because you're going to feel it inside of your nose later. So try to get that booger off in one gigantic glob so that you can flick it at the back of your classmate's head. Okay, next let's do the jumper cable. These black covers, I keep these on there for the next couple of processes to make sure the plugs stay nice and clean. Now, this bit is confusing. I have 4 strips of EMI shielding tape. You will only have 2 because I only have thin strips, but you're going to be receiving 1-inch full-length strips, full-width strips. So take the ones that are slightly shorter. I cut these to a precise length, so you don't have to do that yourself. And peel off the adhesive backing. And for the shorter ones, we're going to be, or the shorter one in your case, install it so it's flush against the edge of one side, and then slowly lay it down so that it's nice and consistent right on the edge. And then for yours, you're going to have some hanging over, left over on the other side, and you're going to trim the excess. Okay, let's do the other side. For this side of the jumper cable, you can apply the tape so that the edge is right below that silkscreen number, J2 or J1. And align it so one side is right on the edge. and try to line that up as best as you can. Oops, I totally botched that. Luckily the adhesive isn't ridiculously strong, so you can undo it if you mess up. Okay, so pin that in place with one fingernail on one side and then do it the rest of the way. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so the overhanging edges, you want to have them aligned so that they're kissing each other. And take your fingernail and just make sure it's well bonded. Okay, now you can take some skizzers and go at it from the top side and just trim off the excess. It's pretty easy to cut. And you don't have to worry too much about cutting into the PCB because there is a little bit of a margin of error. This waffle pattern here is ground plane, so if you cut into it and there's still ground running through it, it's still okay. This shielding tape, it actually serves a function. Without it, the signal quality decreases, and this is especially important because this is a long way for the LCD signal to travel. So this will help maintain the integrity of the connection. Sam from the future here. Before gluing these TPU housings onto the ends of the jumper cable, make sure to write the words CAM and LCD on the EMI shielding tape so that you can see from the outer surface which direction the cable should go. Now, it's not a big deal. Actually, this cable is reversible. You can plug it in to the monitor both this way and this way. But if you plug it in the wrong way, when you touch the screen, there's some lines that show up and some interference. So just write this down so you know to attach the LCD side to the LCD. And that way you're not going to get any weird lines on the screen every time you touch a button or touch the touch screen. Next, we're going to make this into a professional looking product. Using some type of epoxy, I recommend this plastic bonder by JB Weld. The resin is black when fully mixed, so it matches this well. Also, because it's plastic bonder, it's going to be able to stick both to the metal and the plastics of the circuit and the TPU covers. I like to use a mixing stick by cutting off a Q-tip at an angle like that. Provides a nice little scoopy surface. And then I just got this sacrificial surface here, and I'm going to spit out a little bit of epoxy. I don't think this is epoxy, actually. It's something else, but it's similar. And if you don't have this or you can't find it, that's okay. Regular epoxy, two-part epoxy will work. But I do recommend some kind of two-part adhesive because usually it's a lot stronger. And let's mix that up. I recommend one with at least a 15-minute cure time. If you do something with 5 minutes, that's not enough time for this project. Okay, next I want you to pretend like you're in a bagel shop in New York, Noah's Bagels, and using your best smearing technique, smear on, using the diagonal cut edge of the Q-tip, a nice thin, consistent layer of glue onto each of the TPU housings. And be sure to get up onto the edges, like get a little bit of a glue smear right up onto the edge. And I put a little bit of extra glue into the pockets of these top half of the housings, because that's going to be making contact with the structural components of the connector. Okay, that's looking great. Next, we have to apply or press together the two halves. I have these special clamps that I made. I 3D printed some grippy grips, but I'm sure you can jury rig something up yourself, like use books or something. So you can position the stiffener directly over the cutout of the bottom connector, the bottom housing, just like that, and then plop this guy right on top. Okay. It's probably best to keep a rag around so you can wipe off your hands so you don't make more of a mess than you need to. And that's why I put that TPU cover on, because that blob of glue right there could have gotten into the plug. And then using that bit of Q-tip that I cut off from the beginning, I can use that to wipe off any excess residue or glue that is seeping out of the sides. Next, let's install these alpha gels, because we're going to want to install the camera cage onto the drone for powering it, so that we can do the lens shim calibration. Alright, so you want the big end to go into the bottom, the end that contains the brass sleeve, and then you take the ring and push it over the top. And this part can be a little finicky. You can get it on there most of the way using your finger, but it still doesn't quite want to go in all the way, so that's when you can whip out a tool and just kind of massage it in there. Okay, now all 4 alpha gels are installed. We can get our pigeon or our puffin and place one carbon fiber washer down on the studs here, and then line up the alpha gels, and it should slide on there nice and easy. And then you take 4 more of these washers and stick them on the top. And then you can put on the M3 nylock nuts. And then I use a 5.5 box hex nut driver to secure these nylock nuts all the way down. There isn't quite enough clearance to go straight with the screwdriver. You have to come at it at a slight angle, and that's because I needed the extra meat on the top cage for structural support. And you can tighten these alpha gels all the way down until the carbon fiber washer makes full contact with the brass sleeve on the inside, and the gel has full squish. Before plugging in our naked Blackmagic, we need to confirm this is a good 12 volts. So let's plug in our drone, preferably with a smoke stopper in line, in series. And let's get our 12 volts. Okay, so that's positive 12 volts, so that means the red is in fact positive and the black is in fact negative. So if I were to plug this into here, that means the black is on the right and the red is on the left. And remembering back to our power port, this is facing this direction with respect to the rest of the cage. And so if we look at that, let's see if that's correct. Negative should be on the right and positive should be on the left, which it is. So we should be good to go. But as a precaution, you can go in there, follow the traces, follow the wires, make sure everything's connected the way it should be. After verifying that our voltage is the correct value and polarity, we can plug in the JST PH 2.0 connector. I just use a fingernail and I also brace it from the back side, holding on to an exposed rigid portion of the PCB, and I just use a fingernail to push it in all the way. Now that all the components are together, we can go ahead and begin the sensor shim calibration process. But first, let's just power it up and see what happens. So make sure the camera is switched off, which is the forward position on the slider switch. And then you can plug in your drone, preferably with a smoke stopper, in case there is a short. There's better chance that your camera will survive if you have a smoke stopper, for sure. So power on your drone. The camera's still off, mind you. Now you want to power on the drone while the camera's off first, just in case the drone does something crazy, like it flips out. Because you do not want to have your screen attached and your face right above your drone while that's happening. So then you can take your monitor, plug in this end, make sure whichever end you wrote LCD is connected to the LCD side, and then plug in the camera side into the camera. And then you can hit the slider switch back. Okay, so we got a screen, and just confirm that the touch screen works and that you're able to do everything here. And it looks like it's all good. For the sensor shim calibration, I have the back plate removed, and I have my favorite lens on here, having it pointed at a distant object out the window. In this case, it's one of the apartments across the courtyard. You want to have something that's sufficiently far away, like an infinity point. What you want to do is set your aperture to as low of a number as possible in order to have the shallowest depth of field to get the most accurate calibration. Okay, I'm going to make sure the camera switch is off, then power up the drone. Okay, plugging in the LCD, and let's turn on the camera. Okay, so we have an image. To make things easier for this, first go into Monitor and then turn on Focus Assist. This is focus peaking. This will allow us to see what is in focus and what is not. The second thing you can do is press the magnifying glass button, and that will crop in a little bit. Now, you're gonna not see this, but I'm gonna adjust the focal ring on my lens. And right now I am going to close focus. So this is like 0.12 meters, 0.2 meters, 0.5 meters, and this is infinity at the very end. So pay attention to that window out in the distance. You see how the focus point is going in and out? So the actual focus point is right here, but when I go all the way to infinity, it overshoots it. So what's happening here is as I go to infinity, so moving out to infinity, you can see the rear lens element is getting closer to the sensor. So going toward infinity, the lens is moving closer. And we were overshooting, so that means the lens is actually sitting a little too close to the sensor. And what we need to do is add a little shim in order to move it slightly far away, so that when we get to infinity, it lands right on that sweet spot. Now in the opposite case, if we never reached a focus at infinity at all, let's say we pushed it all the way to infinity, but it never got in focus for distant objects. In that case, it would mean that we would need to remove shims in order to make the lens become closer to the sensor. But in our case, we were reaching infinity at about there, and we want it to be there. So that means the lens needs to be moved further away a little bit. Now the shims that come with your camera, it's kind of a crapshoot as far as what you'll get. The shims that I have currently installed are the number 0.5 and 0.3. These numbers represent thickness in millimeters. So right now I have 0.8 millimeters thickness worth of shims in the camera already. And we need to add shims in order to get that sweet spot. So the shims that I have here are 0.025 and 0.1. I have a feeling that 0.025 is not going to be enough, so I'm going to add the 0.1. Alright, I'm going to remove this sensor plate. Okay, I have my 0.1 millimeter shim ready to go and position it in the correct orientation. And what you want to do is just gently work off this gasket and then kind of take your fingernail and make sure the shims stay on the lens mount and they don't come with the sensor plate. Come on. There we go. Okay. So then I can take my shim, place it on the locating pins. Those locating pins make a huge difference toward making this process easier. That's why they're there. And then close it back up. As you close it back up, it does tend to like push the shims away somehow. I don't know how, but you kind of got to just finagle it in there. And if it's not going in, then something's not aligned properly. So you got to try again. See, this shim got stuck on my finger. So if you have fat fingers, it makes this very difficult. And I don't. Okay. Trying again. So it's getting hung up on something, I don't know what. I think it's these, they're falling out from the bottom. So I'm just taking a screwdriver and pushing them back up. And now it's aligned. I felt it go in. Okay, so that's a little trick. If they slip out from the bottom, which they do tend to do, you can use a tool to push them back up. Okay, let's bottom out this screw just so we can hold everything in place and it doesn't come flopping out. Okay, go around and check to make sure every screw is at the bottom, but not like completely tight, just snug. Okay, let's see if I can turn up the screen brightness for you. Is this possible? There we go. Now you should be able to see more easily. Okay, so everything is out of focus, and there. Oh, magic, right on the dot. So listen. Oops. There we go. Now the lens is fully seated. So right when I hit infinity, the very end, that little click there, it aligns with the far window coming into focus. So we were right on the dot. We got lucky this time. Let's say, for instance, we did not get so lucky. Let's say we had a 0.025 shim and a 0.1 millimeter shim, but we needed to land somewhere within the 0.05 millimeter range. The reason why I have some Kapton tape stuck to my fingers is because Kapton tape, at least the one that I have, is about 0.05 millimeters. The calibration is a little bit off, but it's about 0.05 millimeters. So what you can do is just modify one of these shims and place a bit of Kapton tape right near the holes where it connects to the sensor ribbon plate. And what this will do is just thicken the shim just a little bit, in order to create a shimming of your shims. So, shimmy, shim, shim, shimmy, shimmy, shim, shim. Here's your shims for your shims. Now that we know that we have the proper amount of shims in the sensor plate, we can just go ahead and tighten up those screws just one last little bit, make sure they're secure. And then we can reinstall the lens communication ribbon cable. So we have to lift this latch up and stuff this cable in. You may have to use tweezers for this. And just confirm that it's all the way seated by using a fingernail against that stiffener. And then put that latch down. And it should be good. Now we can finally replace the back plate. Let's swing those slot struts back into position and screw these thumb screws back in. Woohoo! And notice at both 45 degrees and negative 30 degrees, the sensor ribbon cable is not going to run into any issues as far as bend radius or pinching. Now that the sensor shim calibration is complete, we can, as a final step, christen this drone by throwing on some grip. Don't mind the hot glue stains. Get a clean pair of scissors. You can clean them off with isopropyl alcohol. That will make cutting this stuff a lot easier. And cut about 5 millimeters down the length of one of the long sides. Now this will be the perfect size to fit on the top cage. Okay, opening up the battery straps to make way for the good stuff. Okay, let's just see how close our fit is first. Okay, that looks good to me. And we can peel off the backing. And let's get it nice and well aligned. And now for everybody's favorite part. Oh yeah. It's very nice. And finally, we can now suit it up so it's ready to go for your next amazing shoot. You've done it. You've completed the cage build for the pigeon or the puffin. Wow. Okay, that was a lot to go through, but take pride in the fact that you probably did one of the most difficult builds in all of FPV. So congratulations. Now you can go out and rip this thing around. No, first you want to do is fly your drone without this camera on board, just with the battery on top. Find some squishy foam or something, mount the battery on top, fly your drone, make sure it's not going to do a flyaway. As long as you get a good tune with the drone itself, even without the camera, it's going to fly pretty well with the camera. You might have to do some minor adjusting after you start putting on the payload, but the payload dynamics of the pigeon or the puffin is designed such that there's minimal camera payload oscillation, so that's not really a huge factor, especially if you're reducing your filters to improve performance and reduce latency in the PID controller loop. Yeah. Okay, have fun out there.